I mean, it sounds kind of vogue to say, but if I'll probably have to give a trigger warning for tonight because it's going to be the darkest night that we've had so far. It's going to get pretty bad. We're going to see, David, it was all wonderful rising until chapter 10, but we talked last week about his transgressions, not only his adultery with Bathsheba, but his murder of Uriah. We got through chapter 12, which was Nathan's prophecy of the consequences of his actions. And basically tonight, we're going to see all of those consequences play out. And again, it's, sin is its own punishment. It's not like God is arbitrarily causing these things to happen. It's a result of David's sinfulness. And really, a lot of it actually is his kids, well, particularly his sons, are just acting like dad, and that causes problems. And David ends up being if not a bad father, at least an inept one, and he's not able to teach his sons the way of the Lord, and it causes eventually we'll get into a civil war, and so that's which, as they say, is the worst kind of war. So it gets pretty rough, but and I guess this is the kind of golden thread through this whole text is, remember, David is a man after God's own heart. So on one hand, we love to think about David and Goliath and David the Conqueror and him triumphantly getting into Jerusalem, but in a lot of ways, David really shows his true colors when he's sorrowing, suffering. I was reading a commentary that said David is a great example of a man of grace, meaning it's not just that he's getting a second chance from God. It's not, yes, but it's more like he recognizes more and more as like he's less of the conquering hero. He recognizes more and more his dependence upon God and on God's mercy. And that's why he's ultimately redeemable, not because he's the conquering hero who never, fell, but because he learns to trust God through his humility, right? And so that's the kind of great lesson of the figure of David. We're going to see, like, he's going to have a lot taken away from him, and he's going to be pretty inept, but yet there's a humble, more contrite, more trusting character that we get. As opposed to, when things were going well, you could question, like, well, is he just faithful to God? Kind of like Job, right? Was he just faithful to God because God was giving him all these favors, And at the same time, David has, as it says, we read in Psalm 51 last week, my sin is always before me. He recognizes, like, any kind of pride I would have in my own accomplishments, like, I've brought this upon myself in many ways because of my sins. So anyway, so we'll see that. We'll see the kind of development of his character as we, and how different it is in contrast to the David we saw in the first part of the book. All right, so let's just get into it. Like I said, it doesn't start off. Yeah, it's going to be a rough night. Okay, so we're in chapter 13, verse 1. So just to, I guess I'll put their names on the board. With all these things we're going to be talking about tonight, I'll try to help you as best I can, and certainly feel free to ask if you get confused. All these different characters, because we're going to have a lot of characters, but I'll put David's sons, at least that we're interested in. His first son is Amnon. His second is Chileab, I think that's how you spell it, or also called Daniel. And his third son is Absalom. And Absalom has a sister named Tamar. And the fourth is Adonijah. All four of these sons have different mothers. Okay, so that's important. They're all half siblings. Okay, so they're related, but they're not fully related. Okay, so that's gonna come into play here. Now, Absalom, David's son, his third son, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar. And after a time, Amnon, David's son, loved her. Amnon is the oldest son and the heir presumptive as the oldest son. Now, what's going to happen? Okay, as I said, David's sons, in a lot of ways, you can just, and I'm sure this was not lost on David. David's sons are really just going to act like dad. Particularly, we're going to see sexual sin and murder. And it's like, that's exactly what David did. So that's what's going to happen. And Amnon, so when we say Tamar was Absalom's sister, meaning she was a full sister to Absalom. She was born of the same mother. And Amnon was so tormented that he made himself ill because of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother, and Jonadab was a very crafty man. So this is their cousin, Jonadab. Okay. Yeah. Also, notice the language here. Jonadab is crafty. Who else was described in the Bible as crafty? Yeah, the serpent in the garden, right? Yeah. So this is So this is our first cousin, and he's going to give some very terrible advice. Okay, to say the least. Verse 4, and he said to them, "O son of the king, why are you so haggard morning after morning? Will you not tell me?" Amnon said to him, "I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." Jonadab said to him, "Lie down on your bed and pretend to be ill." Here, I'll keep the map up here. Lie down on your bed and pretend to be ill. And when your father comes to see you, say to him, "Let my sister Tamar come and give me bread to eat, and prepare the food in my sight, that I may see it and eat it from her hand." So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. And when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, "Please let my sister Tamar come and make a couple of cakes in my sight, that I may eat from her hand." Okay, so obviously, like, he's lusting after his half sister. Okay, that's there's so we see how, like, yeah, the sons are acting like dad, but it's like even worse, right? Like, and then let's keep going. Then David sent home to Tamar, saying, "Go to your brother Amnon's house and prepare food for him." So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house where he was lying down, and she took dough, kneaded it, and made cakes in his sight, and baked the cakes. And she took the pan and emptied it out before him, but he refused to eat. And Amnon said, "Send out everyone from me." So everyone went out from him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food into the chamber, that I may eat from your hand." And Tamar took the cakes she had made and brought them into the chamber to Amnon, her brother. This is, I think, one thing to point out before we keep going. It's kind of a cruel twist here, that who's the one that sends Tamar to his chamber? David, right? Now, David doesn't necessarily suspect what's going to happen. Like I said, I don't think but it is still an example. It's one of the many examples we will see where he's an inept dad. At the very least, he's not aware of what is going on with his kids. And by the way, they're grown kids. I mean, they're not children, right? But, like, he's not aware of what's going on in his own household. Okay, such to the point where he, unfortunately, is the one who walks his daughter right into this trap, unwittingly, right? Not on purpose, but okay. So then we get to verse 11. But when she brought him near to him to eat, he took hold of her and said to her, "Come, lie with me, my sister." She answered him, "No, my brother, do not force me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do this wanton folly." Part of this is what she's saying is, like, obviously not just rape, but incestual rape, right? Is like not even in Israel. Like, we don't do this in Israel. Like, this is beyond, like, normal problems. She answered, as verse 13, "As for me, where could I carry my shame? And as for you, you would be one of the wanton fools in Israel. Now, therefore, I beg you, speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you." but he would not listen to her, and being stronger than she, he forced her and lay with her. So obviously, well, yeah. So again, this form of incest forbidden in the Torah, and then she's trying to reason with him and negotiate with him. She basically is, probably as a last resort, is like, if you just ask our father, he'll give me to you in marriage. Now that would be against the Torah as well, okay? But it's probably just a desperate attempt to you know, put off his advances. So it's not likely, but yeah, she's making a desperate attempt. But he doesn't listen to her, and he rapes her. So then we get to verse 15. Then Amnon hated her with a very great hatred, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. I mean, isn't that a really striking line? You know, that like obviously this was not out of any kind of love or concern at all. It was pure lust. And then, you know, as is typical in these kinds of crimes, right? We have a kind of, you know, this is a modern term, but like we have a kind of victim blaming here, right? It's his problems are blamed on her, right? And he hates her with a hatred that was greater than the love. But again, like, you know, I mean, this text was written, you know, whatever, 3,000 years ago. It's amazing just the insight into human psychology here, that he turns on her, right, and blames her for his own problems. And Amnon said to her, "Arise, be gone." But she said to him, "No, my brother, for this wrong in sending me away is greater than the other which you did to me." But he would not listen to her. I know that probably sounds strange to us, but what she's saying here is that, like, if you send me away, I am basically subject now to a life of destitution, right? Like because she's now that she is a defiled daughter of the king, she's unmarriable. And so in this time and place, as cruel as it is, she's saying, like, for you, I need to, like, I need to stay in your household. Okay. Because otherwise how am I going to be provided for? And normally, from the Torah in Deuteronomy, it has a provision that if a man rapes an unmarried woman, he's obliged to marry her with no possibility of divorce. So Moses did allow divorce. This was one of the times where no possibility, you're stuck, right? And I mean, imagine that kind of a marriage. Not that I want to imagine that, but like, like, yeah, like you're stuck together, right? Why? I mean, again, it's in this time and place, it's because the other option is destitution, poverty, right? So that's why the Torah says it. So yeah, while it sounds a bit barbaric to us, it was to grant a level of security and protection for the woman. Again, since she'd be unmarriable now. So why is it worse? Because now she's doomed for the rest of her life. But he would not listen to her. 17, he called the young man who served him and said, "Put this woman out of my presence and bolt the door after her." Now she was wearing a long robe with sleeves, for thus were the virgin daughters of the king clad of old. So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her. And Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the long robe which she wore, and she laid her hand on her head and went away, crying aloud as she went. I think this is really fascinating, and I don't know if any of you picked up on this, but there's a lot of allusions in this little story to the story of Joseph. I don't know if you picked up on that, but it seems very intentional. So Joseph, remember the coat of many colors. So first of all, Joseph sends everybody out when he realizes his brothers have changed. Okay. Lie with me is said by both Potiphar's wife and Amnon. In fact, I was recently I was in DC at the National Gallery, and I don't remember the artist, but there's these Renaissance paintings, and they're meant to go together. There's two paintings, the canvases are like this big, and one is of this episode of Amnon and Tamar, and the other is an episode of Potiphar's wife and Joseph. So you have a male sexually coercing a female and a female sexually coercing a male, right? And they go together, And I wonder if the artist was also aware of the parallels in these two stories. They're playing off of each other. And then Joseph and Tamar are the only two Old Testament characters said to wear this particular beautiful tunic. So what's translated in ours a long robe, it's in mine, it's translated a long robe with sleeves. My understanding is that Hebrew word, the only other time it's used is for Joseph, his coat of many colors, right? What was part of Joseph's problem with his story? At the very least, inept or neglect or unaware dad shows favoritism to his son, gives him this tunic, and what does it lead to? Problems with his siblings, right? Who almost kill him and then sell him, right? So we've got again, there's parallels with that story and this story here. And Joseph and Tamar have this beautiful tunic. What happens to Joseph's coat of many, this coat of many colors, this long, beautiful tunic he has? It gets ripped up and they put blood on it so that Jacob thinks that he's dead. Well, Tamar rips her beautiful tunic, right? So there's and like I said, those parallels are certainly intentional. The author would have known the story of Joseph, right? And then Joseph and Tamar both suffer at the hands of their brothers, and due to negligent fathers who aren't aware of what's going on with their kids. So anyway, a little interesting kind of parallel there. And like I said, this artist must have been aware of that because, they have these two scenes. Verse 20, and her brother Absalom said to her, has Amnon your brother been with you? Now hold your peace, sister, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this to heart. So Tamar, which that sounds pretty dismissive, but Absalom is playing the long game and very calculated, right? So he's trying to, I think he is trying to comfort his sister and get it move don't dwell on it. But it's not because he doesn't care for her. He's not going to do something about it. It's he's calculating. He's playing the long game, right? And he's going to put this in the memory bank, as we'll see. So Tamar dwelt a desolate woman in her brother Absalom's house, right? Implying she's not marriable now. So he does take her in, her brother. When King David, her full brother, I should say, when King David heard of all these things, he was very angry. But Absalom spoke to Amnon neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had forced his sister Tamar. So we've got, I thought I said this so it would be longer. Okay. So notice, what's the thing? Notice David is very angry, but he doesn't do anything, right? He doesn't do anything to discipline Amnon or to bring him to justice. So again, David is mimicking Jacob. One of the other infamous rape stories in the Bible is the rape of Dinah, Jacob's daughter. And what does Jacob not do? Well, he doesn't do anything. That's the problem. And then who takes it into their own hands? I believe it was Simeon and Judah say, we're going to take this into our own hands. And they slaughter a bunch of they slaughter all the men of the city. And the way they get away with that is they say, hey, let's become one people, but you're going to have to get circumcised so that we can become one people. And while all the men of the city are healing, they go in and slaughter them all, right? As revenge for, and again, why? Because their father didn't do anything, right? Well, same thing here with David. At the very least, he's negligent, right? He's a bad dad in that sense. And this is not going to sit well with Absalom. And he recognizes, as I said, he's going to play the long game, and not only is his brother his rival now, but he's also the one in line for the throne. Okay, and I'll just say this now: Chileab, he does not come into the narrative either because he had already died or for he was unfit to be the king for some other reason. Probably most likely he had died, and he's just not in the story. So he's mentioned as a son of David, but he doesn't come into play in terms of, so what at this point, the two closest contenders for the throne are Amnon and Absalom. Okay. So Chileab just doesn't come into play. We don't know exactly what happened to him, but he probably passed away by some other means. Okay. All right. Verse 23. After 2 full years, Absalom had sheep shearers at Baal Hazor, which is near Ephraim. So Ephraim is here, okay? By the way, did Jacob have a son named Ephraim? Ephraim? He did not. So why is Ephraim a tribe? Yeah, it's Joseph's son. Yeah. So we've got Joseph. Speaking of Joseph, right? Joseph, he has two tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh, and they are the two most influential tribes in the north. Okay, not just because of the territory, but also the people. But Jacob had 12 sons, so why does Joseph get two? What happened? Why is there? Are we missing a tribe, or we just miscount, or we're just like, well, we'll just call it a baker's dozen? Or is there a tribe missing from this map? There is the tribe of Levi. Why? Because they're the priests, right? So the Levites lived all throughout Israel with a special concentration in Jerusalem. Why? Because that's where the temple and the ark is. But their job was to be set aside for God. The entire tribe, men, women, and children. And then from the tribe of Levi come the priests. You know, in the parable of the Good Samaritan, the man is passed by a Levite and a priest. It's like, well, what's the difference? Well, one was a member of the tribe of Levi. The other was a priest who also would have been de facto a member of the tribe of Levi. So the Levites, they did not receive the land, because how did you have wealth and prosperity and income in this time period? Through the land. So this land was all allotted, and it's very spelled out in the Bible at different points which land belongs to which tribe. Levi, though, did not get any land, because Levi's portion was the Lord. Their job was to serve the Lord, and they were to be provided for by the other tribes. So they would you hear things in the Psalms like, give choice portions to the priest, because there are certain parts of the sacrificed animals that were meant to go to the Levites and their families, and that was where their sustenance came from. And it was their job to be in charge of the sacrifices and taking care of the temple. Not only the Levites who were priests, but also their families, right? They would, the Levite women would, weave linens and stuff like that, or so that was their so that's why they're not on the map. So you still got 12 tribes on the map, and you got the hidden 13th tribe, which is Levi. And by the way, Moses and Aaron were Levites. Okay, we won't go into the story of how the Levites became the priests, but yeah, that was part of it. Okay. Anyway, okay, so Absalom invites all the king's sons to Ephraim, which is a town somewhere. Well, to I guess Baal Hazor, which is near Ephraim. Okay. And Absalom came to the king and said, "Behold, your servant has sheep shearers. Please let the king and his servants go with your servant." But the king said to Absalom, "No, my son, let us not all go, lest we be burdensome to you." He pressed him, but he would not go, but gave him his blessing. Then Absalom said, "If not, please let my brother Amnon go with us." And the king said to him, "Why should he go with you?" But Absalom pressed him until he let Amnon and all the king's sons go with him. Then Absalom commanded his servants, "Mark when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say to you, 'Strike Amnon,' then kill him. Fear not, have I not commanded you? Be courageous and be valiant." So the servants of Absalom did to Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and each mounted his mule and fled. Okay, so there's a lot of things here. First of all, he's waited 2 full years. Okay, so like I said, Absalom, he's taking receipts, right, as they say. Also, after 2 years, David has had plenty of time to discipline Amnon and has not. So obviously, he has more cause to Absalom to take this into his into his hands. It's the time of sheep shearing, the wool harvesting season. It says, according, I'm not an expert on this stuff, but from what I read, is a time of celebration and feasting. So Absalom, under the guise of a feast and celebration, first invites his father. Oh, and I also Baal Hazar is about 15 miles north of Jerusalem, so we're right in here somewhere. He first invites who? His father, right? And he invites him to come as the king, as his guest of honor. Um, and I don't, who knows? We don't, again, at the very least, David is unaware, right? He might be a little bit lazy here. Like, why is he not going himself? And then again, like, his second choice is Amnon, who is, in Absalom's invitation, is the guest of honor in David's place, as the heir presumptive. Why does that not raise suspicions with David? Again, at the very least, he's a neglectful dad. Does he not know that, like, there's animosity and good reason for animosity between his sons, particularly these two sons? But doesn't do anything about it. So not only is David negligent in the rape of his daughter, he's also negligent in the murder of his son. Remember, like, what are the what's the parallel? The sons are just doing what the father did, right? But even worse in a lot of ways, right? Absalom, Amnon rapes his sister. Absalom murders his brother, and David is at least through negligence participating in both, right? He's at the very, like I said, the best you could say about him is he's inept. All right, and also too, it's also interesting, right? It's a reversal, and there's a lot of ironic reversals throughout this Samuel literature. But David's sins with Bathsheba and Uriah were a result of manipulation. Now he's being manipulated by his sons. He's being played, right? And seems like he just doesn't get it, and it's leading to problems. So Absalom gets his half brother drunk and slays him. There's also an echo of what other story in Genesis? Cain and Abel, right? Fratricide. So remember, David was supposed to have, and he did have, it seems, in chapter 10, he had the new Garden of Eden. Well, just like with Eden, Adam and Eve's sin, what's the next major sin? Fratricide between their children, right? So now, obviously, Amnon is not going to inherit the throne, right? He's dead. Or maybe I should make it more dramatic, right? Like, okay. Yeah. So again, while there's certainly a personal vendetta here, it's also very expedient for Absalom that he's now the oldest in line for the throne, right? He's got nobody above him in terms of birth order that he has to worry about. And then David's other sons flee, probably thinking that they too are in danger. So anyway, while the sons were on their way, tidings came to David. Absalom has slain all the king's sons, and not one of them is left. Again, this time, David can't just text his kids like, "Hey, you guys okay?" So he got bad information. Then the king arose and tore his garments and lay on the earth, and all his servants who were standing by tore their garments. I mean, David must be thinking at this point, here's my punishment, right? I mean, here, like, all my kids are dead, But Jonadab, the son of Shemaiah, David's brother, said, "Let not my lord suppose that they have killed all the young men, the king's sons. For Amnon alone is dead. For by the command of Absalom, this has been determined from the day he forced his sister Tamar. Now therefore let not my lord the king so take it to heart as to suppose that all the king's sons are dead, for Amnon alone is dead." I mean, who's the only one who knows what really happened? The slimy Jonadab, right? David's nephew, right? He knows, because he knows what. I mean, he was the one who counseled Amnon, and he knows what Absalom is really after. I mean, how, again, that's the only appearance of him that I know of, but yeah, it's really, not a good character. So, all right, 34. But Absalom fled, and the young man who kept the watch lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, many people were coming from the Horonaim road by the side of the mountain. And Jonadab said to the king, Behold, the king's sons have come, as your servant said. So it has come about. And as soon as he had finished speaking, behold, the king's sons came and lifted up their voice and wept. And the king also and all his servants wept very bitterly. So again, obviously, David is super relieved to find out that, okay, it's not all my sons. Now I'm sure, yeah, well, here we'll see. Okay, in the next verse for 37, but Absalom fled and went to Talmai, the son of Amihud, the king of Geshur. So Geshur is up here. Okay, it's not on this map, but it's up. It's up east of the Sea of Galilee. Okay. So Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there 3 years. And the spirit of the king longed to go forth to Absalom, for he was comforted about Amnon, seeing that he was dead. So a few things here. Absalom obviously fears retaliation from his brothers. Talmai is his maternal grandfather. So his mother is from Geshur, which is, again, it's not on this map, but it's up here. So he goes to his mom's, where she's from, to hide. And his grandfather, who's a local king, not as powerful as David, but he's in charge there. And so he takes refuge there. Let's see what else. And then it's also interesting line, right? The spirit of the king longed to go forth to Absalom, for he was comforted about Amnon, seeing that he was dead. So, David, it says that David actually sided with Absalom in a certain sense. He was not happy with Amnon. But again, what has he been doing for 2 years? Why did he not enact justice, right? But he doesn't do anything, and it leads to something worse. Now Amnon's murdered, and Absalom is fled. He didn't tell Absalom, like, he didn't do anything about it, right? So it's like, we don't get the sense from the text that he was particularly on Amnon's side at all. He was, in some ways, he's like relieved, he's comforted that he's dead, right? Because it's like he committed a heinous crime. So David is too cowardly to do anything about it. He's also too cowardly to do anything about Absalom. Absalom flees, and this is gonna, at the very least, it's gonna lead to tension. The fact that the heir of the throne, the new heir to the throne, is taking refuge in a satellite kingdom, right? Not good. So what happens next? Now Joab, this is chapter 14. Now Joab, the son of Zeruiah, that's David's sister. So so Joab is his nephew, remember, commander of his army, perceived that the king's heart went out to Absalom. And Joab sent to Tekoa and fetched from there a wise woman and said to her, pretend to be a mourner and put on mourning garments. Do not anoint yourself with oil, but behave like a woman who has been mourning many days for the dead. And go to the king and speak thus to him. So Joab put the words in her mouth. Okay, so what's going on here? Well, it seems like, so we're going to spend a fair amount of time with Joab, the king's nephew. He's the commander of the army. He's one of the few characters that will directly challenge David. And he doesn't want to supplant David. In a way, he's fiercely loyal to him. However, he also is not afraid to take things into his own hands. And he and his brother Abishai, if you remember, they're pretty hot-headed, and they tend to like to resort to violence, right? Like, violence is a solution. And so Joab seems here, it's sometimes hard to know exactly what Joab is up to, but it seems like he's acting in the best interest of the kingdom. Because at the very least, as I mentioned, the fact that Absalom is estranged from his father is not good for the stability of the realm. Okay, so what is he? And again, as I said, we're not sure what happened to the second son, Chileab. He's probably dead at this point in the story. So Absalom is the heir apparent. So he goes to Tekoa and recruits a wise woman of Tekoa, which is about 10 miles south of Jerusalem. It's also notable. I don't think it's on this map either, but it's also notable as the future home of the prophet Amos. He's not born yet, but just notably. So he goes to this wise woman of Tekoa, and tells her to tell David a parable and put on this mourning act. And yeah, we'll see what happens. So verse 4, when the woman of Tekoa came to the king, she fell on her face to the ground and did obeisance and said, help, O king. And the king said to her, what is your trouble? She answered, alas, I am a widow. My husband is dead. And your handmaid had 2 sons, and they quarreled with one another in the field. And there was no one to part them, and one struck the other and killed him. That ring any bells? 2 brothers in a field, and one strikes the other. It's Cain and Abel, right? Yeah. And now the whole family has risen against your handmaid, and they say, give up the man who struck his brother, that we may kill him for the life of his brother whom he slew. And so they would destroy the heir also. Thus would they quench my coal, which is left, and leave to my husband neither name nor remnant upon the face of the earth. So she tells this story. What is this? What is this? Also, this sounds familiar. Of what did Nathan do with David? He told him a story that was David took at face value as a kind of court case and pronounced a judgment. Joab seems to be aware of this, that this works, I guess, So he has this woman go to him and give him this case that is not real in the sense of she's not talking about literally her 2 sons, but it's a real case in that she's going to have David pronounce a judgment about the same situation that he's in. Again, why David is not aware of this, I don't know. I guess he just, again, took her at face value. And again, this scenario that she has is not unreasonable or unthinkable. Again, she's a widow, so she's dependent upon her sons for sustenance and income, right? So one kills the other. Yes, as horrible as that is, she needs the other son, as she says, not only for her well-being, so that she's not poor, but also there's this idea of doing our kind of God-given duty to the nation to have our name, do our part to help the people of God expand, right? So it's our line's going to be cut off, right? So it's not a crazy scenario what she's coming up with, okay? Verse 8, then the king said to the woman, go to your house, and I will give orders concerning you. And the woman of Tekoa said to the king, on me be the guilt, my lord the king, and on my father's house. Let the king and his throne be guiltless. The king said, so I guess she's thinking here that he's just kind of putting it off because he doesn't want to take responsibility for the decision. Then the king said, if anyone says anything to you, bring him to me, and he shall never touch you again. Then she said, please let the king invoke the Lord your God, that the avenger of blood slay no more, and my son be not destroyed. He said, as the Lord lives, not one hair of your son shall fall to the ground. So as the Lord lives, that's the language of oath making. So, David is making an oath with God as my witness, your son will not die. Okay. It's also ironic, and we will talk more about this later, that he references the hair of your son, because we'll find out later that Absalom was known for his glorious hair. Okay, we'll get there, but just keep that in mind, because that will come up. Okay. All right, verse 12. Then the woman said, please let your handmaid speak a word to the Lord the king, my lord the king. He said, speak. And the woman said, why then have you planned such a thing against the people of God? For in giving this decision, the king convicts himself, inasmuch as the king does not bring his banished one home again. I wonder if David was thinking at this point, not again, why do I keep falling into these traps of he convicts himself, as she says. We all must die. We must all die. We are like water split on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. But God will not take away the life of him who devises means not to keep his banished one an outcast. Again, what's she calling him out on? You're sitting on your hands. You need to do something about this, because, again, at the very least, it's instability in the kingdom if Absalom is not reconciled. Verse 15, now I have come to say this to my lord the king, because the people have made me afraid. And your handmaid thought, I will speak to the king, and it may be that the king will perform the request of his servant. For the king will hear, and will deliver his servant from the hand of the man who would destroy me and my son together from the heritage of God. So yeah, she's saying that, like, again, like, this is trouble for the kingdom. Like, the people at the gates are, the kingdom is going to be rendered asunder if we have a succession crisis. Okay. And your handmaid thought, the word of my Lord the king will set me at rest. For the Lord, my Lord the king, is like the angel of God to discern good and evil. The Lord your God be with you. It's interesting that she tries to flatter David by calling him, the angel of God. Angel means messenger, right? So she flatters him, but this raises his suspicions when she's flattering him so much. So he does get onto her. 18. Then the king answered the woman, do not hide from me anything I ask you. And the woman said, let my lord the king speak. The king said, is the hand of Joab with you in all this? So he's onto her, right? He's like, and why? Probably partly because how does she have insider knowledge of stuff that's going on in the king's household, right? Like, she knows a little too much to be a random woman from Tekoa, right? So he's on to her, and he's on to Joab. Okay, so I guess he did kind of learn something from the Nathan parable, right? The woman answered and said, as surely as you live, my lord the king, one cannot turn to the right hand or to the left from anything that my lord the king has said. It was your servant Joab who bade me. It was he who put all these words in the mouth of your handmaid. In order to change the course of affairs, your servant Joab did this. But my Lord has wisdom like the wisdom of the angel of God to know all things that are on the earth. Then the king said to Joab, behold, now I grant this. Go, bring back the young man Absalom. And Joab fell on his face to the ground and did obeisance and blessed the king. And Joab said, today your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, my lord the king, in that the king has granted the request of his servant. So Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. And the king said, let him dwell apart in his own house. He is not to come into my presence. So Absalom dwelt apart in his own house and did not come into the king's presence. So David tells Joab to fetch him, but does not fully reconcile with him. I don't want to see him. Okay. Again, why? What's he doing? Like, he needs to deal with this, but he just isn't. Now we get the description of Absalom, and this is interesting because the Bible and if you're the Bible is actually pretty thin on physical descriptions of people. It's just the style of ancient Jewish literature. They aren't big on physical descriptions. Okay, I think there's a few reasons for this. Part of it is it's kind of focused on the story and on the person, not so much on their physical characteristics. I think providentially, God did this on purpose because then we can read ourselves into the story easier because we're not comparing our looks to them. However, when a physical characteristic is mentioned, it's usually very important then. Because physical description, notice even Jesus, there's not a physical description of Jesus of any, that I can think of, description of a physical characteristic of Jesus. There's a reason why we have a certain image of him in our mind. That's another story I won't tell here. But in the Gospels, there's no physical characteristics of Jesus described, what he looked like, and that's on par with the Jewish scriptures, with the Jewish literature. However, that absence also then becomes a tool for the authors that when they do mention a physical characteristic of someone, it takes on great importance, including with David. David was, we hear, right, when he's anointed king in Samuel, he's anointed by, not king, when he's anointed as a boy by Samuel in 1 Samuel, it says, God says to Samuel, man looks at the outward appearance, the Lord looks at the heart. And then we find out David is ruddy and handsome in appearance, right? It's like, well, what gives, But that detail is important, right? So that's one of the kind of features of the Bible because there's so few physical descriptions, they become very important when they're mentioned. Samson's hair would be another one. Okay, well, here we have another one here. Verse 25. Now in all Israel, there was no one so much to be praised for his beauty as Absalom. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. It's a way of from head to foot. He was a good-looking guy, right? And when he cut the hair of his head, for at the end of every year he used to cut it, when it was heavy on him, he cut it. He weighed the hair of his head 200 shekels by the king's weight. There was born to Absalom 3 sons and 1 daughter whose name was Tamar. She was a beautiful woman. So a few things here. Okay. Who else? We didn't read this, but who else is obsessed with his appearance in Samuel literature? We didn't read this, but Saul is also obsessed. He's a handsome guy, and he has an almost narcissistic love of his own beauty, right? Which I don't think is a good quality in anyone, but especially in men, it's kind of like, I don't know, get over yourself. In women too, but like, I don't know. I don't know, Absalom just like brushing his hair, whatever. So notice, note too, how often beauty has caused problems in Samuel. I mean, Saul seemed to have a problem with that, right? Obviously, David gets ensnared by the beauty of Bathsheba. And then, we're going to see the fact that Absalom is so beautiful doesn't bode well for him on many levels, right? Again, it kind of goes back to that line, that famous line from God in verse, that he says, man looks at the outward appearance, the Lord looks at the heart. Beauty that is not tied to virtue is bad news, right? There's nothing wrong with beauty. God created beauty. God created us to be beautiful. And, granted, some are more beautiful than others, but like, it's not wrong to be beautiful, but if it's not tied to the good, then it's a problem. If it's not tied to virtue, then it's a problem. And we're obviously aware of this, right? In our own world, right? What's the, in Psalm 31, it says, charm is deceptive and beauty fleeting, but the woman who fears the Lord is to be praised, right? And that's like, again, like in a fallen world, the outward appearance can be used to deceive. So you just have to be careful. And you also shouldn't fall in love with your own appearance, right? As Absalom does. Okay. Why? Because beauty can often conceal moral ugliness. And that's what actually counts in the end, both back then and now. Okay. And then details about his hair are preparation for the narrative about his bizarre death. We're going to look at that. 200 shekels is a deliberate exaggeration. This is the equivalent of over 5 pounds. So his hair, plus like, who weighs their hair? Like, come on, it's like he cuts it and he's just like, it weighs so much, anyway. It says that Absalom has 3 sons. We'll find out later that he actually built a funeral monument for himself because he says, I have no son. We don't know. There's 2 possibilities here. Either his sons died or he built the funeral monument before he had sons and then kept it. We'll get to that later. And then he has a daughter, and he, in a nice gesture, especially for a character who's not really a great character, like he does name her Tamar after her disgraced aunt. So it's kind of an homage to her. So, okay, verse 28. So Absalom dwelt 2 full years in Jerusalem without coming into the king's presence. That's a long time. Again, David is giving his own son the cold shoulder, right? It's like, David, you got to deal with this guy. You got to talk to him, right? Otherwise, he's going to start to scheme. Then Absalom sent for Joab to send him to the king, but Joab would not come to him. And he sent a second time, but by the way, Absalom and Joab are cousins. So this is still a family affair, right? And he sent a second time, but Joab would not come. Then he said to his servants, see, Joab's field is next to mine, and he has barley there. Go and set it on fire. So Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Not exactly a kind gesture. It would certainly get his attention, but, again, how do you get income in this time? Land. So it's like, he's sticking it to Joab, like, hey, do what I want. Pay attention to me. Come see me. Then Joab arose and went to Absalom at his house and said to him, why have your servants set my field on fire? Absalom answered Joab, behold, I sent word to you, come here, that I may send you to the king, and to ask, why have I come from Geshur? It would be better for me to be there still. So Absalom's, again, thinking, why the heck did my father have me come down here? Like, he doesn't want to see me or have anything to do with me, it seems like. Now, therefore, let me go into the presence of the king, and if there is guilt in me, let him kill me. Then Joab went to the king and told him, and he summoned Absalom. So he came to the king and bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. So it seems like they have some sort of recognition or reconciliation. But based on what happens, it seems to be pretty sterile and ice cold, right? It's not, yeah, it's not, it's not a full reconciliation. It has almost a formality, right? So David ices him out for 2 full years after he'd been gone for 3 years. And then, yeah, like I said, the other thing too is David also, not only does this kiss seem pretty thin, but also he also doesn't punish or discipline Absalom for his crimes, right? Because he did murder the heir apparent. He just kind of lets him hang around. Okay, so chapter 15. So Absalom is going to take full advantage of this inept behavior of his father. So get to chapter 15, verse 1. After this, Absalom got himself a chariot and horses and 50 men to run before him. So chariots and horses and 50 men, that's a sign of royalty, right? There you go. You got a royal bodyguard with chariots. You got 50 men for a bodyguard. It's a signal that he's moving and he's thinking about kingship. And Absalom used to rise early and stand beside the way of the gate. And when any man had a suit to come before the king for judgment, Absalom would call to him and say, "From what city are you?" And when he said, "Your servant is of such and such a tribe in Israel," Absalom would say to him, "See, your claims are good and right, but there is no man deputed by the king to hear you." Absalom said, moreover, "Oh, that I were judge in the land. Then every man with a suit or cause might come to me, and I would give him justice." And whenever a man came near to do obeisance to him, he would put out his hand and take hold of him and kiss him. Thus Absalom did to all of Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. So part of what we got going on here is, remember, one of the things that David did was centralize the government in Jerusalem. So, and David, remember, also is the Supreme Court of the country. So if you're in one of these other tribes, if your case, eventually you have to bring your case before the king. And while centralization has a lot of advantages, some of the disadvantages are, that's a lot of work on the king's desk. And so, and what's the challenge, right? So Absalom is kind of playing off of the potential discontent of the people from the other tribes. They're not from Jerusalem, so they come to Jerusalem. They see the king's son, and he seems like a nice guy. And he's like a lot of political usurpers, both ancient and now. He curries favor with the people by portraying his dad as, again, inept, really, or not able to speedily bring them justice. So, and he wins over their hearts because he's acting as if David has no concern for the cases of the common people, which we know is not true. But again, imagine you're from somewhere up north here and you come all the way to Jerusalem and, you don't get to go to the king right away. And here you got Absalom kind of, he seems like a pretty good guy. He'd make a good king, right? Even though he's never actually proven himself. Okay, verse 7. And at the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Please let me go and pay my vow, which I have vowed to the Lord in Hebron. For your servant vowed a vow while I dwelt at Geshur in Aram, saying, if the Lord will indeed bring me back to Jerusalem, then I will offer worship to the Lord." The king said, "Go in peace." Okay, so, so Absalom goes to Hebron under a guise of piety. So Hebron is right here. You remember what's significant about Hebron? That's where David was first crowned king, first by the Jews, by Judah, and then by all of Israel. He reigned for 7 years in Hebron before he took Jerusalem as his capital. And Hebron is deep in the heart of Judah, right? And so that was the place where David was crowned king. Under a guise of piety, because Absalom says, well, when I was in Geshur up with my mom's dad, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, I made a vow that if I ever go back to Jerusalem, I will worship the Lord at Hebron, okay? It was also Absalom's birthplace. It was where he was born. He was born to David at Hebron. And so, like I said, again, it's puzzling. Like David's ineptitude, his lack of action, because David has to know that like Hebron is a symbolically significant place, right? Like why does Absalom want to go there? Like it shouldn't have been that hard for him to figure out, but he just kind of lets him do it. And then it's also ironic and tragic. His last recorded words to his son are "Go in peace," because Absalom. Yeah, you know what? Salam is shalom, peace. But what's Ab? No, like Abba, father. So Absalom means like my father's peace. I mean, how ironic is that, right? The son who's named my father's peace is the one who rebels against his father. And the last recorded words that David says to his son Absalom is "Go in peace." But again, it's like David, his ineptitude. It's like, how could you not have seen this coming? Absalom, for 4 years, he's gotten chariots, he's gotten his bodyguard, he starts talking to people, right? It's like, again, even if he just had a little bit of an ear to the ground, right? He should know, not to mention Absalom hasn't exactly proven himself trustworthy. So, but David lets him go. So he arose and went to Hebron. But Absalom sent secret messengers throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then say, Absalom is king at Hebron. When Absalom went, 200 men from Jerusalem who were invited guests, and they went in their simplicity and knew nothing. And while Absalom was offering the sacrifices, he sent for Ahithophel the Gileonite, David's counselor, from his city Gilo. And the conspiracy grew stronger, and the people with Absalom kept increasing. So over the course of this 4 years, Absalom has sympathizers now all over the country. He goes to Hebron, sends messengers there, declare me king in Hebron. He makes sacrifices, which is either himself or with the help of a priest that he brings. It doesn't say who. He also gets this guy. He'll become an important figure. I don't know. It's hard to say his name. Ahithophel. Guess who he is? He's the grandfather of Bathsheba, and he was one of David's counselors. Okay. He also dupes 200 men of Jerusalem to be in Hebron, which makes them look like conspirators, traitors. And they didn't know any better, but it's like, oops, like we didn't realize we were in the middle of a usurpation, right? So yeah, why does this is a tough one. Ahithophel, the grandfather of Bathsheba, why does he betray David? Well, we don't know this explicitly, but probably because of David's adultery with his granddaughter and the murder of his grandson-in-law. And he's going to come into play here in a little bit. Ahithophel is also a type of Judas, because he betrays the Lord's anointed. He will try to both he and Judas will either attempt or will ambush their Lord, and not to spoil it, but like he will eventually hang himself, just like Judas did when his plans don't go the way he was hoping. Okay. And also too, and I'll talk about this a little later, but Absalom is also in the church fathers and stuff, is also a type of Judas. There's a lot of things that Absalom does that parallel Judas and how he betrays our Lord. Okay, so verse 13. And a messenger came to David saying, the hearts of the men of Israel have gone after Absalom. Then David said to all his servants who were with him in Jerusalem, arise and let us flee, or else there will be no escape for us from Absalom. Go in haste, lest he overtake us quickly and bring down evil upon us and strike the city with the edge of the sword. And the king's servants said to the king, behold, your servants are ready to do whatever my lord the king decides. So the king went forth and all his household after him. And the king left 10 concubines to keep the house. And the king went forth and all the people after him. And they halted at the last house. And all his servants passed him by. And all the Cherethites and all the Pelethites and all the 600 Gittites who had followed him from Gath passed on before the king. So David seems to think that the rebellion is widespread. And again, in ancient times, the fog of war, especially then, communication is difficult. He doesn't exactly know, all of a sudden, it seems like everybody's rising up against him. He doesn't know that these 200 that were mentioned were duped. So he's thinking they all went to Hebron and they've betrayed me. Okay. But it also seems like, again, the character change. This is very far cry from the guy who was the defeater of Goliath and, was told to get 100 Philistine foreskins for a dowry and got 200, right? He almost seems like, again, he doesn't want to confront his son. So he does, so he flees. But it's, like I said, it has a different feel than when he was fleeing Saul, right? It seems kind of cowardly. He does leave 10 concubines behind to take care of his household, indicating that he hopes to return. So he's not totally leaving, he's leaving them behind to take care of the house. And then the Cherethites, Pelethites, and Gittites, they're foreign mercenaries that serve as his bodyguard, and they are very loyal to him. Okay, keep going. 19. Then the king said to Ittai the Gittite. By the way, the Gittites are from Gath, which is in Philistia. So these are actually Philistines that David got to know in his wandering days, who transferred their loyalty to him, and they're his foreign bodyguards. I was thinking about this, why, the Pope has a foreign mercenary bodyguard, right? The Swiss Guard. I was thinking about this, why in history is it that bodyguards of kings are mercenaries? And the only thing I could come up with, I don't know if this is true, but if you have mercenaries as your closest bodyguard, you know that their loyalty is based on funds. So you just tell them hey, if anybody makes you an offer, come to me and I'll make you a better offer. Whereas if you have people within your own kingdom, if there's a coup, it's well, I don't know who to trust. But the mercenaries, you keep them as your closest bodyguards because you always know that, I don't know, that's what I came up with. I don't know if that's true, but because it's not just David or the Pope, right? It's throughout history, often kings and queens will have their closest bodyguards are foreigners that they pay, because I guess it's they're not in the country drama, so it's they won't switch sides willy-nilly. It's they just want to get paid, Anyway, so he's gonna talk to his loyal captain of those mercenaries. Then the king said to Ittai the Gittite, why do you go also with us? Go back and stay with the king, for you are a foreigner and also an exile from your home. You came only yesterday, and shall I today make you wander about with us, seeing I go I know not where? Go back and take your brethren with you, and may the Lord show mercy and faithfulness to you. But Ittai answered the king, as the Lord lives and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king shall be, whether for death or for life, there also will your servant be. And David said to Ittai, go then, pass on. So Ittai the Gittite passed on, with all his men and all the little ones who were with him. And all the country wept aloud as the people passed by, and the king crossed the brook Kidron, and all the people passed on towards the wilderness. Just to give you a visual, we'll go back to this picture. So this would have been what the city of David, Jerusalem, looked like in his time. This is the Kidron Valley, and then this is the slope of the Mount of Olives. So he's passing. And by the way, why Why is he fleeing to the east? Well, Absalom is in Hebron, and he's got people, all sympathizers, all throughout the north, and the Philistines are to the west. So basically, the only direction David can go is east, right? So he's going this way. He'll eventually go to Jericho and then actually cross the Jordan River, which is a reversal of what Israel did, right? Again, theologically, we're going in reverse. We're going backwards, okay? But he's going to cross the Kidron Brook is down here, and this is the Kidron Valley. And so he's going down the Kidron Valley and then up the Mount of Olives, okay? All right. Okay, and Abiathar came up, and behold, Zadok came also with all the Levites, bearing the ark of the covenant of God. And they set down the ark of God until all the people had passed out of the city. So Abiathar and Zadok are the priests, two of the priests, okay, the two chief priests. And they have the ark with them. Then the king said to Zadok, carry the ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back and let me see both it and his habitation. But if he says, I have no pleasure in you, behold, here I am. Let him do to me what seems good to him. The king also said to Zadok the priest, look, go back to the city in peace, you and Abiathar, and your two sons, Ahimaaz your son, and Jonathan the son of Abiathar. See, I will wait at the fords of the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me. So Zadok and Abiathar carried the ark of God back to Jerusalem, and they remained there. So these two chief priests, Abiathar and Zadok, are both loyal to David. But notice, again, we do see here humility on David's part. He humbly trusts in the Lord. He refuses to use the ark. It was common, right, for them to take the ark into battle. But he's like, nope, I established the sanctuary of the Lord in Jerusalem. That's the focal point of the nation, and it needs to stay there. I'm not going to use it as a good luck charm, right? I placed my life in the hands of God, and God will do with me as he sees fit. So again, there is some progress here. We're seeing some moral progress in humility, okay? And then the other thing too, going on at the same time, Abiathar and Zadok will act as informants for David by remaining in Jerusalem, and we're going to see that. While David is leaving, he's also setting up a spy network. And so the two chief priests remaining in Jerusalem are going to be the ones closest to the goings-on of Jerusalem. And again, this whole procession, down into the Kidron Valley and up the Mount of Olives, it's like a tragic reversal of what we saw in chapter 6, where it was all joy and triumph and victory. We're going in reverse, both for David personally, but even more so, like the kingdom, God's kingdom on earth, is being undone, right? We're going backwards, okay? But David went up the ascent of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went, barefoot, and with his head covered. And all the people who were with him covered their heads, and they went up, weeping as they went. So barefoot and covered his head, signs of penance, or signs of weeping, but also mourning, signs of also of penance. Like he didn't have to go up barefoot, but he's like, voluntary penance. And it was told David, Ahithophel, so that Bathsheba's grandfather, is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, O Lord, I pray you, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. So he's worried because this guy is he's wise or well known for his counsel. And David's like, and he also probably isn't happy with me, right? my new grandfather-in-law. Also too, again, looking forward in this, who else wept on the Mount of Olives? Jesus, right? There's a foreshadowing here of the agony in the garden, right? Which also took place on the Mount of Olives. So we've got, David is weeping just like Jesus when he's weeping in distress at the prospect of his passion. Okay. Verse 32, when David came to the summit of the Mount of Olives, where God was worshipped, behold, Hushai the Archite came to meet him with his coat torn and earth upon his head. So signs of mourning. He's loyal to the king. He's sad this is happening. David said to him, if you go on with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king. Notice too, David is already referring to his son as the king, right? It's like, yeah. It's like, again, he doesn't really want to face his own son. I will be your servant, O king, as I have been your father's servant in time past. So now I will be your servant. Then you will defeat for me the counsel of Ahithophel. Are not Zadok and Abiathar the priests with you there? So whatever you hear from the king's house, tell it to Zadok and Abiathar the priests. Behold, their 2 sons are with them there, Ahimaaz, Zadok's son, and Jonathan, Abiathar's son, and by them you shall send to me everything you hear. So Hushai, David's friend, came into the city just as Absalom was entering Jerusalem. So even while he's leaving, right, David is setting up this spy network. So he's afraid that, Bathsheba's grandfather is wise and has an in for him. So he puts Hushai to be a double agent to counteract his counsel with Hushai's counsel, who Hushai must have been respected, right? And then he's going to tell the priests, Zadok and Abiathar, and then they have their 2 sons who are young and will be able to cover long distances. The sons of the priests are going to be the ones to tell David what's going on. So he's setting up a spy network, even as he's mourning, as he's leaving the Mount of Olives. Okay, chapter 16. When David had passed a little beyond the summit, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, met him with a couple of donkeys saddled, bearing 200 loaves of bread, 100 bunches of raisins, 100 of summer fruits, and a skin of wine. We've met him before, okay? Mephibosheth, this is the guy who is the servant of Mephibosheth, and he's come, again, expressing his loyalty and support for David, giving him food and donkeys for the journey. And the king said to Ziba, why have you brought these? Ziba answered, the donkeys are for the king's household to ride on, the bread and summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine for those who faint in the wilderness to drink. And the king said, and where is your master's son? Ziba said to the king, behold, he remains in Jerusalem, for he said, today the house of Israel will give me back the kingdom of my father. Then the king said to Ziba, behold, all that belonged to Mephibosheth is now yours. And Ziba said, I do obeisance. Let me ever find favor in your sight, my lord and king. So Ziba shows loyalty to David. There's 2 sides of this story, though. Okay, I won't spoil it, but there's 2 sides of the story. But he's giving this stuff to David, and he's like, Mephibosheth says, hey, this is the day that my father's house will be restored, or at least like we're getting back for what happened to my father's house, Saul's house. Okay. And then David says, all right, Ziba, then you get Saul's land back. Right? I give it to you. Verse 5. When King David came to Bahurim, I don't know if this is on the map or not. I don't think it is. It'll be somewhere in here, though, in the land of Benjamin. When David came to Bahurim, there came out a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. And as he came, he cursed continually, and he threw stones at David, and all the servants of King David, and all the people, and all the mighty men were on his right hand and on his left. And Shimei said as he cursed, begone, begone, you man of blood, you worthless fellow. The Lord has avenged upon you all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. And the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. See, your ruin is on you, for you are a man of blood. So as David is, going to the next town, right? This guy who's a house from the house of Saul, a Saulite, he's a Benjaminite. He comes and he's still resentful over the fact that David, like there's still lingering resent. And it's one of those things, right, where it's like, kick him while he's down. And so he's cursing him, he's throwing stones at him, right? And he's saying you're a man of blood. Now, actually, interestingly, right, we know that David was not responsible for the bloodshed that led to Saul's downfall. Remember all those events that, like, they were convenient for David's rise, but David never actually committed treachery against Saul or his household, even though he could have. But, this guy is obviously has blind bias towards his family, right? And so he's not, so David is kick him while he's down, right? Then Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, so this is Joab's brother, one of the hotheads, David's nephew, said to the king, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and take off his head." So for them, it's like violence is the answer, right? By the way, who also called themselves a dead dog? Mephibosheth, right? When he came to David and said, why would you show kindness? I'm a dead dog. To call someone a dead dog, to call someone a dog in this time is like you're the lowest of the low. I guess they figured dogs were, I don't know, scavengers, scroungers, right? They were like the low, the Jesus with the Canaanite woman, right? He compares her to a dog, right? And says, he implies, right? He says, should the scraps be or should the food of the children be given to the dogs? And she says, even the dogs eat the scraps from the master's table. He says, you've got faith, I'll give you what you want. Anyway, so to call someone a dog, much less a dead dog, is like, I'm the lowest of the low and I'm dead. So Mephibosheth actually compares himself to that. Now Abishai is saying, like, okay, this guy, he's annoying, he's cursing us, let's lop off his head. But the king said, "What have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah?" So you can hear the exasperation in David's, like, man, Joab and Abishai, you guys are just like, chill out, If he is cursing because the Lord has said to him, curse David, who then shall say, why have you done so? And David said to Abishai and to all his servants, behold, my own son seeks my life. How much more now may this Benjaminite? There's a lot of wisdom there, right? Let him alone and let him curse, for the Lord has bidden him. It may be that the Lord will look upon my affliction, and that the Lord will repay me with good for this cursing of me today. So David and his men went on the road, while Shimei went along on the hillside opposite him, and cursed as he went, and threw stones at him and flung dust. And the king and all the people who were with him arrived weary at the Jordan, and there he refreshed himself. So their journey is over past Jericho, and now they're at the Jordan River. Okay. Notice again, we do see, despite David's failings and ineptitude, we do see here he is growing in humility quite a bit, right? Notice, there were people who deserved it. David was by no means treacherous or ruthless, but we've seen in the narrative how if there's people who deserve to die, he's not afraid, like the messengers who came, he wasn't afraid to say, okay, take him out, right? But here, right, he actually, is like, even though Shimei's curse is wrong in terms of the details, like, he didn't actually commit the bloodshed on Saul. David did commit murder. So David is like, even though he doesn't know it, he's right. And how do I know that, God hasn't told him to curse me, right? Maybe God will have pity on me. Not because he thinks that he's some kind of prophet inspired by God, but David has much more humility and trust in God's providence, right? And he's not, it's like, and as he says, like, if my own son wants me dead, of course this guy's going to want me dead. So I'm not going to, he takes the curses and abuses humbly and says, maybe God will have mercy on me for doing this. Okay. Also too, right, who does David foreshadow? The new David, right? Jesus takes curses and insults and abuse. But just like David here, Christ did not open his mouth and did not strike back, his adversaries, right? So David is foreshadowing Christ again here. And he arrives at the Jordan River. Okay, all right. So now we get to Ahithophel. So the Bathsheba, remember, Bathsheba's granddad, okay, who definitely has some, vendettas against David, okay. Now Absalom and all the people, the men of Israel, came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel with him. And when Hushai the Archite, David's friend, came to Absalom, Hushai said to Absalom, "Long live the king, long live the king." Notice he doesn't say who the king is, though, right? And Absalom said to Hushai, "Is this your loyalty to your friend? Why did you not go with your friend?" And Hushai said to Absalom, "No, for whom the Lord and this people and all the men of Israel have chosen, his will I be, and with him I will remain. Again and again, whom should I serve? Should it not be his son? As I have served your father, so I will serve you." Notice again, he's also a little coy there, right? He kind of says, he does say he'll serve him, but he says, I'll serve the guy who the Lord and all the people of Israel have chosen. Like, yeah. Then Absalom says to Ahithophel, "Give your counsel, what shall we do?" And Ahithophel said to Absalom, "Go into your father's concubines, whom he has left to keep the house, and all Israel will hear that you have made yourself odious to your father, and the hands of all who are with you will be strengthened." So they pitched a tent for Absalom upon the roof, and Absalom went into his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Now in those days the counsel which Ahithophel gave was as if one consulted the oracle of God, so was all the counsel of Ahithophel esteemed, both by David and by Absalom. So we get a side here at the end that, like, the reason why David was afraid of this guy is it was as if he was an oracle of God, right? Everybody listened to him. David, and David's like, uh-oh, like this guy has an in for me. And people listen to him. So that's why he's afraid of him. And then what does Ahithophel do? Really heinous, horrible act. So remember the 10 concubines that David left behind to take care of the house, right? Which is, again, an act of, like, hopefully I'll be back. Okay. What does Ahithophel, I don't know if I'm probably not saying it right. Ahithophel do? He tells him to sleep with him. So what, to sleep with the 10 concubines? This is a grave assertion of power and usurpation. Not to mention a horrifying moral crime. Okay, as I've mentioned, typically in this time and place in the world in the ancient Near East, the successor of the king, especially if it was a usurpation, right, or a different, not the son, but like if another king took the place, he would inherit the harem of the previous king, right? That was part of how you showed and consolidated your power. It's also particularly cruel here that this is suggested by Bathsheba's grandfather, right? Who likely holds a personal grudge against David. It's a kind of brutal eye for eye revenge on display, right? Sexual crime was committed against, well, it was adultery, but like not saying adultery is okay, but like sexual crime was committed against his granddaughter. Now we have a sexual crime here, but it's even worse, right? Again, it's another example that you've seen in this narrative, sin begetting sin, right? And then not only that, not only does he take his father's concubines, his harem, it's done on the rooftop in plain sight of everybody. Again, it's broadcasted to everybody, like, I'm doing this. And notice, like, he also says that you have made yourself odious to your father. In other words, like, this is going to burn some bridges. People are going to be like, oh, like, they're not, like, this is serious, right? Like, this is not just a little, there's really no recovery from this, right? To do this to your father, okay, and to his household. So it's done on the roof. And then also, of course, this is also the fulfillment of Nathan's prophecy, right? Nathan says to David, "You did this in secret, but someone," he doesn't say who, David doesn't know that's going to be his own son, "someone will take your wives and lie with them in broad daylight," right? And here's who it is. It's Absalom, who is doing it as the ultimate screw you to his father, right? Really horrific. And then kind of the last detail, right? This is on a tent on the rooftop. Note that it happens on the very same roof that David was sitting on his couch and lusted after Bathsheba, right? So again, there's a kind of irony there. Now, the thing that I haven't mentioned, and again, it's just not really part of the narrative. We do find, well, I didn't say that. We do find out what happens to the concubines in a little bit. One thing that we would be especially sensitive to in our day is how horrific this was for the 10 concubines. It's just not really, that's just not really the concern of the text, right? Obviously, for them, that would have been a traumatic, horrific event. And it's something that we would be sensitive to and aware of. That's just not the point of the story, right? So I don't mean to gloss over that. It's just where the story is in the midst of this political drama, right? And yeah, that's just not the story is just not told from their perspective. We will find out what happens to them. David does end up taking care of them, but like, yeah. So anyway, like, yeah, that's certainly not something that we should forget, right? That obviously this is a horrible, but it also shows too, right? Like the cascade of sin and crimes is affecting a lot of innocent people, right? And these 10 concubines were loyal to David and were innocent, and they were what a brutal thing to have happen to them, right? Okay. Chapter 17. Moreover, Ahithophel said to Absalom, "Let me choose 12,000 men, and I will set out and pursue David tonight. I will come upon him while he is weary and discouraged, and throw him into a panic, and all the people who are with him will flee. I will strike down the king only, and I will bring all the people back to you as a bride comes home to her husband. You seek the life of only one man, and all the people will be at peace." And the advice pleased Absalom and all the elders of Israel. So Ahithophel's counsel is, now that you've done this horrible act of usurpation, now let's assassinate the king. Everybody else will fall apart. Also notice too that he uses nuptial imagery, right? The people will come back as a bride coming home to her husband, something that his granddaughter was not able to do, right? I don't know. It's a little hint maybe that there's, like I said, more going on here. It's also interesting, he's saying leave one man vulnerable by the abandonment of the army. That's how Uriah died. So there's a possible subtle like references to that he's taking it out on David, right? Verse 5, then Absalom said, "Call Hushai the Archite also, and let us hear what he has to say." And when Hushai came to Absalom, Absalom said to him, "Thus has Ahithophel spoken. Shall we do as he advises? If not, you speak." Then Hushai said to Absalom, "This time the counsel which Ahithophel has given is not good." I mean, again, notice like this guy gets listened to a lot. But he's like, but this time he's wrong. Okay. Hushai said, "Moreover, you know that your father and his men are mighty men, and that they are enraged like a bear robbed of her cubs in the field. Besides, your father is expert at war. He will not spend the night with the people. Behold, even now he has hidden himself in one of the pits or in some other place. And when some of the people fall at the first attack, whoever hears it will say, 'There has been a slaughter among the people who follow Absalom.' Then even the valiant man, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, will utterly melt with fear. For all Israel knows that your father is a mighty man, and that those who are with him are valiant men. But my counsel is that all Israel be gathered to you, from Dan to Beersheba," which is a term meaning Dan is in the north, Beersheba is right there in the south. So the whole country, it's a term for the whole country. "As the sand by the sea for multitude, and that you go to battle in person. So we shall come upon him in some place where he is to be found, and we shall light upon him as the dew falls on the ground. And of him and all his men with him not one will be left. If he withdraws into a city, then all Israel will bring ropes to that city, and we shall drag it into the valley until not even a pebble is to be found there." And Absalom and all the men of Israel said, "The counsel of Hushai the Archite is better than the counsel of Ahithophel. For the Lord has ordained this is the narrator. For the Lord had ordained to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel, so that the Lord might bring evil upon Absalom." So basically, Hushai's counsel is the opposite. Instead of go after quickly while they're running away in a mission to just assassinate the king, instead take some time. You've got support. Gather forces from the whole country to come support you. Let's get a big army and we'll attack him. And he says, he talks about how your dad, remember, is a great warrior and really valiant, which is like interesting because recently David hasn't really been acting this way, but he's conjuring up all these, memories of David's past glories as a great warrior to put doubt and fear in the heart of Absalom, and it works, right? He also appeals to Absalom's vanity, because notice Ahithophel wanted to go after himself, and Hushai says, you lead us, Absalom. So Absalom is happy with that. But what's he doing in reality? Remember, he's a double agent. He's just buying time for David. So and it ends up working, right? Also, too, it says, for the Lord had ordained the defeat of the good counsel, right? Remember David's prayer a couple of chapters ago? He prays to God, like, please help them to not listen to that guy who happened to be Bathsheba's grandfather, who doesn't really like me, right? The Lord answers his prayer, and here's the answer, right? And again, it's not that God, as we've seen throughout this book, it's not that God is acting in directly so much, but he's orchestrating these things for his own purposes. Not just the good things, but even the bad things, even the sins and the weaknesses of people. God's purposes are being carried out. Then Hushai said to Zadok and Abiathar, the priests. So now here we get to see David's spy network kicks into action. Thus and so did Ahithophel counsel Absalom and the elders of Israel, and thus and so I have counseled. Now therefore send quickly and tell David, do not lodge tonight at the fords of the wilderness, but by all means pass over the Jordan, lest the king and all the people who are with him be swallowed up. It's not clear. Either Hushai didn't know that Absalom took his counsel, or he's not sure that Absalom is going to actually follow through on his counsel. So he tells David, like, hey, like, you could be in big danger, big trouble. Get over the river, because when you're over a river in this time, right, it's harder to cross. It takes time to cross a river with a lot of people in an army. Now Jonathan and Ahimahaz were waiting at Enrogel. A maidservant used to go and tell them, and they would go and tell King David, for they must not be seen entering the city. But a lad saw them and told Absalom. So both of them went away quickly and came to the house of a man at Bahurim. Remember, that was on the road. So, okay, what's happening here? So Hushai tells the two priests. They tell their two sons to relay the message, but they couldn't be seen in the city, like leaving the city. So they had a maidservant go from the priests to their sons, and she tells them, but then as these two sons of the priests are leaving, they're seen by a lad, some boy, who then tells on them to Absalom that they're leaving to go in the direction of David. Okay. They came to the house of a man at Bahurim, ironically the house of Shimei, right, the guy who cursed David, who had a well, the hometown of him, who had a well in his courtyard, and they went down into it. And the woman took and spread a covering over the well's mouth, and scattered grain upon it, and nothing was known of it. When Absalom's servants came to the woman at the house, they said, where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan? And the woman said to them, they have gone over the brook of water. And when they had sought and could not find them, they returned to Jerusalem. There's echoes here of the story of Rahab, and who hid the two spies, right? And it was in this area because this town, Bahurim, is between Jerusalem and Jericho. Remember in Jericho when Rahab hid the two spies, right? Also notice too, throughout this narrative, while like the main characters are the men, right? Like you get these instances where women intervene in like subtle but like critical ways. I don't know. It's interesting too, I think. Like the widow or the woman of Tekoa, right? Like she absolutely impacts the story, but in a different way than the men are, and same with this woman. So, after they had gone, the men came up out of the well and went and told King David. They said to David, arise and go quickly over the water, for thus and so has Ahithophel counseled against you. Then David arose and all the people who were with him, and they crossed the Jordan. By daybreak, not one was left who had not crossed the Jordan. When Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey and went off home to his own city. And he set his house in order and hanged himself and died and was buried in the tomb of his father. So once he sees that, nope, we missed our chance. And again, he's he doesn't think the prospects of success are good, David's not going to be happy with him. So the kind of practical reason, why does he go back home? Because then he could get a proper burial by his family. Well, other than the fact that he committed suicide, but instead of wait to see what David does with me, right, or does with my body, right. So doesn't end well for them. And again, he's a type of Judas. He betrays David. Then David came to Mahanaim. That's here, Mahanaim. So he goes across the Jordan up here. This is ironic too, because remember Saul's son Ishbosheth. Remember, that was his headquarters. Remember back when David was, So now David is ironically has to set up his headquarters that was the place of his rival, right? Okay, and his son is in Jerusalem. And Absalom crossed the Jordan with all the men of Israel. Now Absalom had set Amasa over the army instead of Joab. Amasa was the son of a man named Ithra the Ishmaelite, who had married Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, sister of Zeruiah. So this is a cousin, Joab's mother. This is Joab's cousin. So Amasa is also a cousin in the family. And Israel and Absalom encamped in the land of Gilead. When David came to Mahanaim, Shobi, the son of Nahash, from Rabbath of the Ammonites, and Machir, the son of Amiel, from Lodibar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite, from Rogelim, brought beds, basins, and earthen vessels, wheat, barley, meal, parched grain, beans, and lentils, honey, and curds, and sheep, and cheese from the herd, for David and the people with him to eat. For they said, the people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. So here he has some loyal supporters, including Ammonites, like non-Israelites. So David does have support, and he's being supplied with food for his band of people, not just his army, but his band of people who have his fierce, loyal followers. Okay, I know we're past time, but should we do chapter 18 just to get to the conclusion of the rebellion? Okay, and then that would be a good place to stop if you get, okay, sorry. We'll get to, because it'll end, and then the rebellion will end, and then it'll be a good stopping point. Okay. Then David mustered the men who were with him and set over them commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. And David sent forth the army, 1/3 under the command of Joab, 1/3 under the command of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and 1/3 under the command of Ittai the Gittite. Notice here, David again springing into action. Finally, we got the old David back. He's like, okay, time to get into action. Warrior David, right? And the king said to the men, I myself will also go out with you. And by the way, he's older at this time too. He's at least over 50. I mean, we know he lived till he was 70. So he's, and he's like, I'm going to go into battle too. Here we go. Okay, we got the old David back finally. But the men said, you shall not go out. For if we flee, they will not care about us. If half of us die, they will not care about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us. Therefore, it is better that you send us help from the city. So they're saying, hey, they're after you, right? If they get you, then all is lost. You stay back and you give us orders from and then the king. The king said to them, whatever seems best to you, I will do. Notice again here, this to me does not seem like cowardice. This is prudence, right? And and also humility. David's like, I don't need to go get the glory, right? Okay, fine, you're right, makes sense. Okay. So the king stood at the side of the gate, while all the army marched out by hundreds and by thousands. And the king ordered Joab and Abishai and Ittai, deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave orders to all the commanders about Absalom. Notice, why is that emphasized? Okay, everybody knows, David's wish is deal gently with Absalom. This is not just something he told his commanders. Everybody in his camp, he says, be merciful to my son, okay, Absalom. So the army went out into the field against Israel, and the battle was fought in the forest of Ephraim. So here's Ephraim. So David's here, Jerusalem's here, right? And so it happened in this area, okay? And the men of Israel were defeated there by the servants of David. and the slaughter there was great on that day, 20,000 men. The battle spread over the face of all the country, and the forest devoured more people that day than the sword. Kind of a terrible thought, right? Like there's some, like the Civil War battles of the wilderness, or American Civil War, the battles of the wilderness, right? Like the terrain came into play. And really, it kind of sounds like, without giving the details of this battle, then it kind of sounds like David's loyal, hardy, mighty men who are much more experienced in combat are able to navigate the terrain and use guerrilla warfare and mow down Absalom's force, who are much more less organized and new to the game, right? And yeah. And Absalom chanced to meet the servants of David. And Absalom was riding upon his mule, and the mule went under the thick branches of a great oak, and his head caught fast in the oak, and he was left hanging between heaven and earth, while the mule that was under him went on. And a certain man saw it and said and told Joab, "Behold, I saw Absalom hanging in an oak." Joab said to the man who told him, "What, you saw him? Why then did you not strike him there to the ground? I would have been glad to give you 10 pieces of silver and a belt." But the man said to Joab, "Even if I felt in my hand the weight of 1,000 pieces of silver, I would not put forth my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, for my sake protect the young man Absalom. On the other hand, if I had dealt treacherously against his life, and there is nothing hidden from the king, then you yourself would have stood aloof." Joab said, I will not waste time like this with you." And he took 3 darts in his hand and thrust them into the heart of Absalom while he was still alive in the oak. And the 10 young men, Joab's armor bearers, surrounded Absalom and struck him and killed him. Okay, so this is pretty rough, right? So, first of all, yeah, so, we talked a lot about Absalom's hair. It ends up being the cause of his downfall. I mean, it's kind of like, in a way, it's like tragically comical, right? Like he's riding along on his mule, which is the preferred transport of the royal family, and his hair gets caught in the branches of a great oak, and he gets stuck. And notice the drama, right? He's hanging between heaven and earth, okay? And then, and also too, David, remember his oath to the woman, the wise woman of Tekoa? Your son, who's not really her son, it's his son, his hair of his head will not fall to the ground. Well, it doesn't, because he's hanging from a tree by his hair, right? The sort, pride. This is ultimately pride goeth before the fall, right? Also, too, again, I said Absalom, type of Judas, right? So he's hanging, right? Even though it's not suicide, but he's hanging. And then, this man, we don't want to hear who he is, but he heard David and is obedient to him, and because everybody knows we're gonna deal gently, we're not gonna kill Absalom. And also too, notice, we've seen this motif before, talking about like, taking things into your own hands, like I won't strike the Lord's anointed, or David goes after the guy who kills Saul. Like, how dare you put your hand, like, take matters into your own hands. We got the same motif of this language of like, don't take that, don't touch the king's son, don't touch the anointed one's son, right? That kind of thing. So there's that motif. And then Joab says, I don't got time for you. Who's, he's the hothead, who's involved in a number of murders. Okay, this is the at least third that I count. Abner, Uriah, and now Absalom. He was involved in all those murders, and there's one more coming. Okay, so he's a hothead and likes to solve things with violence. Okay, and then also too, this darts. Darts is hard to translate. The word that's translated as darts. It's kind of, there's other words. If it was a spear where he thrust them through, there would have been other words they use in Hebrew. But the word that's translated in mine as dart is hard to translate, but it makes it sound like it's something that was less than deadly. Like something that Absalom knew, here's this guy hanging by his hair on a tree, something that isn't going to kill him right away. He thrusts into him so that he dies a painful death. So it's not just that he's killing him, it's a kind of torture. Because it's also like he puts those, whatever the darts are, right? Maybe like a sharp stick or something, like something that won't kill him, or right away. And then his armor bearers have to finish the job, right? So it sounds like there's even more going on here than just like quick murder. It's like Joab's like, I'm gonna stick it to this guy. No pun intended, right? Maybe it was a little intended there. Okay. All right. But what is he doing? He's disobeying David. But also Joab tends to be the kind of guy who, or he there's multiple times we've seen where he stands up to David, and he does here. Although in Joab's defense, right, like again, is David being a little bit foolish here, right? The whole problem is rebellion, right? And Absalom is leading the rebellion. So it's not like in Joab's defense, it's like, yeah, in a war of rebellion, like you take out the puppet king, right? Then Joab blew the trumpet, and the troops came back from pursuing Israel, for Joab restrained them. And they took Absalom and threw him into a great pit in the forest, and raised over him a very great heap of stones. And all Israel fled, every one to his own home. That's a disgraceful burial, right? Because you throw a bunch of stones on him, and then nobody knows where he is. Or not to mention, you have to get the stones off. So it's a shameful burial. Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and set up for himself the pillar which is in the king's valley, for he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. He called the pillar after his own name, and it is called Absalom's monument to this day. There actually is a monument in Jerusalem still called Absalom's tomb, presumably empty because he wasn't buried there. Although they think most likely that monument, as it's constructed today, was built in the 1st century, time of Jesus. So but on the spot and it's in the Kidron Valley, so it's Absalom's monument for himself stands like right here, and then they either rebuilt it or redid it in the 1st century, and that's what's still standing there today. There's actually you can go visit Absalom, but it's not the original, if that makes sense. So David hears tidings, verse 19, so last section for tonight. Then said Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, one of the runners, the spies, let me run and carry tidings to the king, that the Lord has delivered him from the power of his enemies. And Joab said to him, you are not to carry tidings today. You may carry tidings another day, but today you shall carry no tidings, because the king's son is dead. Then Joab said to the Cushite, go, tell the king what you have seen. Cushite, Cush is another name for Ethiopia. So this guy's a foreigner. He's not from here. Okay. The Cushite bowed before Joab and ran. Then Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said again to Joab, come what may, let me also run after the Cushite. And Joab said, why will you run, my son, seeing that you will have no reward for the tidings? Come what may, he said, I will run. So he said to him, run. Then Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain and outran the Cushite, who is not as familiar with the territory because he's not from here. So he gets outrun. Why is Joab saying, hey, this young kid, right, this young guy is like, hey, like, I want to go tell the king. Why? Because he's excited, but also, too, reward, right? He might be rewarded. Joab knows David enough to know he's not going to be happy, right? So don't do it. Let's send this foreigner, right? We'll let him take the brunt, right? But he still wants to go after him, so he's like, fine, go do it. I'm telling you. Now David was sitting between the 2 gates, and the watchman went up to the roof of the gate by the wall. And when he lifted up his eyes and looked, he saw a man running alone. And the watchman called out and told the king. And the king said, if he is alone, there are tidings in his mouth. Makes sense in this time. If there's one guy coming, it means we won the battle, good news. If there's multiple guys coming, not good news, because we're probably running away, right? Stragglers, right? Like, I survived, and that's not good. And then he came apace and drew near. And the watchman saw another man running, and the watchman called out to the gate and said, see, another man running alone. The king said, he also brings tidings. Has David just been a little optimistic here? Like, again, the more guys that are coming, it's not good sign, okay? And the watchman said, I think the running of the foremost is like the running of Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok. And the king said, he is a good man and comes with good tidings. Okay. Then Ahimaaz cried out to the king, all is well. I believe the word it's translated in mine as all is well is shalom. Okay. And he bowed before the king with his face to the earth and said, blessed be the Lord your God, who's delivered up the men who raised their hand against my lord the king. And the king said, is it well with the young man Absalom? Notice David's not asking about how the battle went, he's asking about Absalom, his son, whose name means my father's shalom, my father's peace, right? Ahimaaz answered, When Joab sent your servant, I saw a great tumult, but I do not know what it was. And the king said, Turn aside and stand here. So he turned aside and stood still. Now, either this young man, Ahimaaz, he either got the message from Joab, or he honestly did not see what happened. He wasn't aware that Absalom was murdered. Or he sidesteps the question because he realizes, oh, yeah, he really is concerned about that. I'm not going to answer, right? And behold, the Cushite came, and the Cushite said, Good tidings for my lord and king. Notice also, too, remember, there's this motif, right? We had it earlier where David gets these messengers reporting. So it's again, it's literature rhyming, right? And the Cushite said, Good tidings for my lord the king. For the Lord has delivered you this day from the power of all who rose up against you. The king said to the Cushite, Is it well with the young man Absalom? And the Cushite answered, May the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up against you for evil be like that young man. He doesn't answer directly. He answers in a polite way. But yeah, he died. Yeah. And the king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said, Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom. Would I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son. This is one of the more moving scenes, I would say, in the entire Old Testament. David weeping for Absalom. It's complex, though, right? Because, on one hand, like, it's very moving, right? A father, and especially like how horrible of a thing that is then and now for a parent to bury their child or to learn of their death, right? And David also, in this particular case, he does seem to be aware, like, would I have died instead of you? Like, it's my fault, right? David knows that, like, because of his sin with Bathsheba and the consequences of that, and then how he didn't deal with his sons and all their shenanigans, right? He put it off too long. Like, David's like, again, like any parent who'd be in this situation, he's like, I'd rather have been me than you, but also he's like, I'm responsible for this, right? I take responsibility. Like my folly, my misdeeds have led to this death, right? He shows the tenderness of a father. At the same time, though, he's also ignoring his son's treachery, which seems to be kind of at odds with like his duty to the kingdom, right? Like Absalom did commit some heinous crimes and tried to overthrow the kingdom, and like that's not good, right? So it's, I don't know, it's a complex thing. On one hand, it's like, David, and certainly David here is foreshadowing Christ. In Luke 19, Jesus weeps over Jerusalem. He weeps over the death of Lazarus, right? So like David, the weeping king, like that is foreshadowing Jesus, right? Jesus is like, oh Jerusalem, that you would come to me. Also, David is a symbol here of God the Father, right? Who, despite our treachery and despite our sins, weeps over us, and then even says, would I had died instead of you. And what does God the Father do? Sends his son to die instead of us. So God actually does what David is incapable of doing. So again, it's a really complex scene, because on one hand it's very moving, but on the other hand it's like, well, David, like yes, this is really sad, but like, you like, this was probably the best outcome, right? I mean, and that like Absalom had done some horrible things, and Joab was right in a certain sense, right? To like end it, right? It ended the, so and that's essentially, we won't go into it tonight. We can do it next week, but that's basically what Joab is going to say to him in chapter 19 is like, hey, like, if you keep mourning, like, all these people who gave their lives for you and died for you, and you're mourning for the guy who rebelled against you, you need to like go back to being the king, right? And he does. But anyway, yeah. So that's a good ending point. But that's that's the end of the rebellion of Absalom, and in the end of Absalom. Oh, here, yeah, oh, and here, right. And I don't know. Tamar got defiled, so she's basically dead, right? And now we're at Adonijah, and he does actually try to take the kingship, but that's in Kings, so we're not going to get to that. But yeah. So anyway, all right. So next week we'll finish up. We've actually only got 2 more chapters of chronological narrative, and then the story ends and picks up in First Kings, and then we have the last 5 chapters, 21, 22, 23, and 24, 4 chapters, sorry. The last 4 chapters are an appendix. So they are not chronologically in the story, but we'll talk about that and why that's kind of there. And it kind of wraps up like some of the big themes. And then I won't like tell the whole story, but I'll kind of, but you'd have to go into, but the story after chapter 20 picks up with First Kings. And David's death is not actually until First Kings. We're not going to look at that closely, but we'll kind of talk about it. And that'll be our last week. So